In this area, 2005 is the centennial for the province of Saskatchewan. To many, it's a cause of celebration, and to others, primarily First Nations people and First Nations communities, it's a cause for serious reflection about our place in society. The recent inquiries or commissions in Saskatchewan have highlighted the negative aspects of some of the interactions between First Nations and non-First Nations governmental institutions, primarily the justice system. However, these inquiries or commissions have also provided some hope for a better future for First Nations in Saskatchewan and in their recommendations. The onset on those recommendations that are provided in many of the inquiries and the commissions that have come forward is a requirement of political will from all levels of government. And when we celebrate Saskatchewan in the 100 years that it's been in place, as First Nations people, we look back and reflect how good was that 100 years for us, and how damaging was that 100 years for us. So we certainly do have to take and evaluate what has happened, primarily make changes to what needs to occur in the next little while. These commissions and in their recommendations have also challenged all governments to work in partnership and to see that hope realized. I would be remiss in not reminding people, particularly in light of Saskatchewan Centennial, that we've already had a basis for this partnership. And that basis for our in the partnership for government is a treaty relationship. As long as all governments recognize this partnership through treaty, I continue to have hopes that Saskatchewan will have a better place for our children, and that the governments will be able to, not only in the next little while processes are happening in this particular year, in many other roundtables and settings that are happening in Ottawa, that we will be able to present a better picture for our children and a result to come out of it. And I participated in those roundtables and also in the Aboriginal Commission on Health, and try and bring home as much as possible to our people in Saskatchewan, both on and off reserve. And hopefully in relation to treaty, that those will be forward in the next little while. And I look forward particularly to this spring, when we're able to hopefully gather as three levels of government nationally to really seriously deal with the issues that are related to First Nations and Métis people. When one reads the report and recommendation of the Justice Reform Commission, a theme emerges that this is not a cure-all solution, but rather there must be a collaborative and interdisciplinary approach developed by First Nations, non-First Nations governments to begin tackling to the many problems identified in these two inquiries, to get to the root of the problem on these inquiries. It's been a common belief that within First Nations communities that First Nations coming into conflict with the law is not in of itself a problem, but rather than a symptom of one or more underlying problems within our people. And one of the most underlying problems, and our leaders have said this over and over again, is the issue of poverty in both on and off reserve. The Justice Reform Commission recognized that this, when it's made its recommendations, some of which include but are not limited to the following, and they recognized all these areas: that Saskatchewan, the FSIN, and the Métis collaborate on a FAS awareness training program; that Canada, in consultation with other orders of government, develop a social and economic policy plans focusing on improving the quality way of life for First Nations and Métis people. And I think many times we've heard our national chief talk about the quality way of life and how we improve it. And we're looking at, in the next little while, these roundtables that are being brought forward in Ottawa and throughout Canada that these will address some of these social and economic policy plans required to make that quality way of life. That INAC review funding related to Indian Child and Family Services to ensure there are enough resources to provide services that will prevent children from coming into care. And coming into care and working closely was the highlight yesterday in a meeting with government, and looking at the recent situation in one of our agencies where the instrument of law has taken away the duty to involve First Nations people. And it's political will that has not only made that issue much better for us, but it's also the political will to look after and take care of our children. The Department of Community Resources and Employment consults with various groups to develop local community plans in strengthening the family through provision of cultural and relevant skills training. That there be more support services available for women in seeking safety from violent situations. And many of our tribal councils, grand councils, the FSIN, are developing women's commissions so that the voice of women is brought forward, and that the issues that are very sensitive to men that cannot be brought forward are brought forward by women and very captured well. And we're glad to have made that home for our Women's Commission within our Constitution at the FSIN, our convention. And that there be more focused drug addictions programs available, and that there be targeted race relations incentives implemented. I think in this area, when we look at what's received in taxation and in profits and in areas of gaming, that many of those can be targeted to those that are a symptom of crime, and that comes into the effect of focusing more on addiction programs and dealing with those programs. These recommendations shed light on the fact that there are social economic factors that are behind the fact that First Nations people are coming into conflict with the criminal justice system. Many First Nations enter the justice system because of actions committed while under the influence of drug and alcohol. These are health and social issues that must be addressed immediately and as soon as possible. And all levels of government must be very cooperative and supportive of those programs that are being developed, and to deal immediately with those. The GRC highlights that solutions cannot be found by focusing on one area, but keeping with First Nations traditions. The solutions must be found on collaborative approach into the spheres of education, economic development, health strategies, involving families and schools. The recommendation also shed light on the fact that solutions to the large issue must involve local First Nations leadership and communities. And I submit that this involvement should occur not only on reserve, but also on and off reserve settings. The recommendation of the Justice Reform Commission, while insightful, are not something new. They've been highlighted virtually in almost every Justice Commission or government inquiry reported in many years. Yet these socio-economic conditions are not improving fast enough. And this week we've recently had the Premier Summit in dealing with the economy, a step in the right direction. The first day was concentrated on the inclusion of First Nations people, Aboriginal people within the economy. And that is a step in the right direction. We also had many various, and I recognize former Minister Mitchell on putting a couple of inquiries together. Still those inquiries waiting justice. yet we had come through many recommendations out of those. Other inquiries that have been done that are similar. Like I said earlier, political will must be involved in all levels of government to take those recommendations. Non-First Nations government must take a leap of faith and invest their energies at finding creative methods to remedy these negative socioeconomic factors. And the future of Saskatchewan certainly depends on it. The demographics that are coming out of our communities have reflected in the next many years that the majority of the population of this province is going to be Aboriginal First Nation. The infrastructures that we create as First Nations leaders, as government and partners, have to reflect on those demographics. We have to prepare for that infrastructure that's coming up. If we don't do anything, we have failed miserably, and that isn't an option. The leap of faith will require a non-First Nations government to work with the local First Nations communities to ensure that options and strategies that are developed are relevant. While people tend to focus on delivering programs to unreserved communities, which is certainly required, there are ways that non-First Nations government can develop strategies with off-reserve communities. Tribal agency grand councils are ready and willing to work cooperatively with all levels of government. And I encourage that service delivery in those areas, those governments that have that political will, immediately deal with those, because those flow directly to our communities. And those initiatives, I remember when we first started talking about the issue of justice, then Vice Chief Dan Bellegarde was in charge of justice. And he had asked the Justice Minister, you give me 10% of your whole justice budget in courts, corrections, and policing, and I'll stop that rotating door that's at the correctional center. I'll cut it by 50% because of the programs, the ideas that were coming forward. And those were discussions that happened many years ago when we first started in the area of justice. Still today, we're just not working fast enough in order to stop those doors. This cooperative approach that is happening today is what First Nations need, and I believe that when we do put our minds together, we'll be able to work a solution out that brings the same spirit and intent, the solution, spirit and intent that's working closely with treaties and the treaty relationship. And that collaboration or that partnership will need to be tested if society is to see the implementation of any of these recommendations. That partnership that I talk about. While the Justice Reform Commission made many recommendations related to elevating socio-economic conditions and making institutional changes in the justice system, the Stonechild Inquiry recommendations focused on a point of first contact of First Nations people with the criminal justice system, which is the police.